Daf Yomi, Tractate Menachos. Tractate Menachos, Tractate Menachos, Tractate Menachos. Top of the page with the words Mali Amar Rabbi Shimon. Tamid Rabbi Shimon Meshum Nuchshavin Menachal Basla. What should I understand that Rabbi Shimon says with regard to such a case is the reason of Rabbi Shimon, who says that a meal offering from which a handful is removed for the sake of another meal offering is valid and affects acceptance. That intent that is recognizably false does not disqualify an offering. And if so, this meal offering from which a handful is removed for the sake of an animal offering is also a case of intent that is recognizably false, and therefore the meal offering should not be disqualified. What do you mean by Rabbi Shimon Or perhaps the reason of Rabbi Shimon is that it is written, and this is the law of the meal offering, Leviticus 6:7, which indicates that there is one law for all meal offerings. If so, then a meal offering from which a handful is removed for the sake of an animal offering should be disqualified, since it is not written, and this is the law of meal offering and a slaughtered offering. Rav Asi says to Rav Yehoshua, have we ascertained the depth of the opinion of Rabbi Shimon in this matter? In other words, Rabbi Shimon's reasoning is not known. The Gemara explains why Rav Asi did not resolve this dilemma. Rav Asi did not resolve the dilemma of Rav Yehoshua in accordance with the resolution stated by Rabbah, that there is a distinction between one who removes the handful of a meal offering for the sake of another meal offering, and one who removes it for the sake of another owner because of the difficulty posted by Abaya in 2b, that the halacha of both these cases is derived from the same comparison in the Torah between meal offerings and animal offerings. Likewise, Rav Asi did not resolve the dilemma in accordance with the resolution stated by Rabbah at the verse, and this is the law of the meal offering, teaches that a meal offering from which a handful was removed for the sake of another meal offering is valid, whereas a meal offering from which a handful was removed for the sake of an animal offering is disqualified. This is because of the difficulty arising from the verse, and this is the law of the sin offering, Leviticus 6:18. Despite the verse, the halacha is that a sin offering that was slaughtered for the sake of another sin offering is invalid. Finally, Rav Asi did not resolve the dilemma in accordance with the resolution stated by Rav Asi, that there is a distinction between one who removes a handful of the meal offering prepared in one vessel for the sake of a different vessel, and one removes it for the sake of a meal offering prepared in a different vessel because of the difficulty posed by Ravacha, son of Rabbah. This difficulty concerns the case where one removes the handful of a dry meal offering for the sake of one mixed with oil. Rabbi Shimon holds that such a meal offering is valid despite the fact that a person's intent referred to the meal offering itself, not the vessel. Chutz minchas choite minchas kinois b'yishlam minchas choite chatas k'di rachmana le'osum le'Hashem le'yitin le'lavoy nekichatas hi v'goymel ela minchas kinois minalan. The Mishnah teaches that all meal offerings from which a handful is removed, not for their sake, but for the sake of another meal offering, are fit for sacrifice, except for the meal offering of a sinner and the meal offering of jealousy. The Gemara asks, granted, the meal offering of a sinner is disqualified when handles are removed from it, not for its own sake, as the merciful one calls it a sin offering in the verse. He shall put no oil upon it, neither shall he put any frankincense upon it, for it is a sin offering, and he shall bring it to the priest, and the priest shall take his handful of Leviticus 5:11 through 12. This verse indicates that just as a sin offering is disqualified when sacrificed, not for its own sake, so too the meal offering of a sinner is disqualified when a handful is removed from it, not for its own sake. But with regard to the meal offering of jealousy, where do we derive that this is the halacha? The Tani Tanan coming to Reb Nachman. Minchas kino is moito ninovo. The Gemara answers that this halacha may be derived from a Braita, as a Tana taught a Braita before Reb Nachman. With regard to money that was designated for a meal offering of jealousy, its surplus, meaning the money remaining after the purchase of a meal offering, is used to purchase communal gift offerings. Amar le Shabir Kamart. Maskeres avon ksiv ba, ubechates ksiv ba, ubechates ksiv oisen nasen lachem, lases davoy noida, machatos mentecha, mentecha nedava, minchas kinois mentecha nedava, ukachatas machatas besula shlo lishma, minchas kinois besula shlo lishma. Rav Nachman said to him, "You are saying well, as it is written with regard to a meal offering of jealousy, bringing iniquity to remembrance, Numbers 5:15. As is written with regard to a sin offering, and he has given it to you to bear the iniquity of the congregation, Leviticus 10:17. A verbal analogy is drawn between the two uses of the term iniquity in these verses. This teaches just as in the case of sin offering and surplus is used to purchase communal gift offerings, so too, with regard to a meal offering of jealousy, its surplus is used to purchase communal gift offerings, and a meal offering of jealousy is also like a sin offering in another aspect. Just as sin offering is disqualified when sacrificed not for its own sake, so too a meal offering of jealousy is disqualified when a handful is removed from it not for its own sake. The Gemara asks if that is so, that the halakha of a meal offering of jealousy is derived from a verbal analogy to a sin offering based on the word iniquity. And the guilt offering should also be disqualified if it was sacrificed not for its own sake, as a similar verbal analogy may be derived from the verse that states the iniquity of the congregation, Leviticus 10:17, with regard to a sin offering, and the verse that states, and shall bear his iniquity, Leviticus 5:17, in connection with a guilt offering. Dani navon miavon. The Gemara responds, one derives a verbal analogy based on the word iniquity from a verse that likewise issues the term iniquity, but one does not derive a verbal analogy based on the term his iniquity from a verse that uses the term iniquity. What is the difference here? What is the difference? What difference is there? His sin. Didn't the school of Rabbi Shmuel teach the following analogy with regard to leprosy of houses? The verse states, and the priest shall return on the seventh day, Leviticus 14:39. And another verse concerning the priest's visit 7 days later states, and the priest shall come and look, Leviticus 14:44. This returning and this coming have the same meaning, and one can therefore derive by verbal analogy that the halakha that applies if the leprosy had spread at the conclusion of the first week applies if it had spread again by the end of the following week, all the more so should a less pronounced difference of one letter be avon and avono not prevent the teaching of a verbal analogy. Ve'od ligmar avono me'avon nishmias hakol nechsiul im lo yagiv binasa avono. And furthermore, that one derives a verbal analogy from the term his iniquity stated with regard to a guilt offering, and the term his iniquity from the verse concerning the sin offering brought for the iniquity for hearing the voice, meaning the sin offering of one who takes a false oath that he does not have any information relevant to a matter, when another requests that he testify about it, as is written, if he does not utter it, then he shall bear his iniquity. We just went through the Rambam's 178th positive commandment, which is to bear testimony if somebody saw something. Here we have it in the Daf. It's amazing. Ela ki gamegezer shavan motani davahu diamri. Rather, it must be that when the verbal analogy was derived, it was derived only with regard to halach, so that the surplus from the money designated for meal offering of jealousy is used to purchase communal gift offerings, and not with regard to the halach, that meal offering of jealousy, from which a handful was removed, not for its own sake, is disqualified. And if you would say that there's a principle that there is no partial verbal analogy, that principle does not apply in this instance, as the Merciful One revealed with regard to a sin offering that the halacha of other offerings may not be derived from this case, as the verse states, and slaughter it for a sin offering, Leviticus 4:33. The verse indicates that it, meaning a sin offering when slaughtered for its own sake, is valid, and when slaughtered not for its own sake, it is disqualified. But all other sacrificial animals, whether sacrificed for their sake or not for their sake, are valid. Ela minchas chayit minchas chenois the Gemara asks, but the Merciful One, if the Merciful One revealed, one cannot derive the halacha of other offerings that were sacrificed not for their sake, from sin offering, then from where do we derive the halacha that the meal offering of a sinner and the meal offering of jealousy are disqualified when a handful is removed from them not for their sake? Chatas tamamai mishum nechziv bahi haganami ha kitiv behu hi. The Gemara explains with regard to a sin offering what is the reason that it is disqualified when sacrificed not for its own sake. It is because it is written with regard to this offering, it. In the verse discussing the sin offering of the Nasi, it is a sin offering, Leviticus 4:24. This indicates that a sin offering is valid only when it is sacrificed for its own sake. So too, it is written with regard to them, meaning the meal offering of a sinner and the verbal and the meal offering of jealousy, it. In the case of the meal offering of a sinner, the verse states it is a sin offering, Leviticus 5:11, and with regard to the meal offering of jealousy, it is written, it is a meal offering of jealousy, Numbers 5:15, Hashem Nami, Ogesiv Behu, Ahu, Hu the Aktovasi Murin, Hu Diksi. The Gemara challenges, but if so, concerning a guilt offering as well, is written about this offering, it. As the verse states, it is a guilt offering, Leviticus 7:5. Accordingly, a guilt offering should likewise be disqualified if it is slaughtered not for its own sake. The Gemara responds, the term it is written with regard to the stage after the burning of the sacrificial portions of a guilt offering which are intended for burning upon the altar. Kedetanya, as it is taught in a Braita, one derives from the word Aval Hashem lo nemar bo hu ela achar ktosimurin hu atzmo shoik hu treimurin kosher. Time the Braita one derives from the word it, that if the offering was slaughtered not for its own sake, it is disqualified only in the case of a sin offering, but concerning guilt offering, it is stated about this offering, it is a guilt offering. Only with regard to the stage after the burning of the sacrificial portions, the Braita adds one cannot derive that if these portions were burned not for the sake of the guilt offering, then the offering is disqualified, since the guilt offering itself is valid if its sacrificial portions were not burned upon the altar at all. Ve'elahu lamali Chidravuna marav Hashem shnitak le'riyah Ushichato stam kasher shumola. The Gemara asks, but if so, why do I need the word it stated with regard to a guilt offering? The Gemara answers, it is necessary for that which Rav Huna says that Rav says, with regard to a guilt offering whose owner died, or whose transgression was otherwise atoned for, and that was therefore consigned by the court to grazing until it develops a blemish, so that it can be sold, and the proceeds used to purchase a burnt offering. If, before it developed a blemish, someone slaughtered it without specification of its purpose, it is fit if it was sacrificed as a burnt offering. Nitak in, lo nitak lo. Amar kra hu behaviato yehe. The Gemara infers, if it was consigned to grazing, yes, it is fit. If it was sacrificed as a burnt offering, if slaughtered by inference, if it was not consigned to grazing, it is not fit. What is the reason for this? The verse states it is a guilt offering, indicating that it shall remain as it is, meaning as a guilt offering unless it is consigned by the court to another purpose. Amarav, minchas ha'oimer, shikamatza shaloi lishma psula, hoi lubat lahatir v'loi tira, v'chein ata omer b'asham nazir. Turning to 4b, b'asham etzoyra, sheshachton shaloi lishma psulin, hoi lubat lehachshir v'loi yishiru. The Mishnah teaches that all the meal offerings from which a handful is removed not for their sake are fit for sacrifice, but they do not fulfill the owner's obligation. Concerning this, Rav says, with regard to the Omer meal offering, meaning the measure of barley brought as a meal offering on the 16th of Nisan, see Leviticus 23, 9 through 14, if the priest removed a handful from it not for its own sake, it is disqualified. It is disqualified since an Omer meal offering came for a specific purpose, namely to permit the consumption of the new crop. And this meal offering did not permit the consumption of the new crop because its rites were performed not for its own sake. And so you say with regard to the guilt offering of a Nazarite who became ritually pure, whose proper sacrifice enables the Nazarite to restart his Nazariteship of fresh and purity. Now return to form B. And so you say with regard to the guilt offering of a leper, whose proper sacrifice enables the leper to enter the Israelite camp and to partake of offerings of sanctity, that if one slaughters these offerings not for their own sake, they are disqualified. They are disqualified since their sacrifice came to render the Nazarite and leper fit. These guilt offerings do not render them fit. Okay? Tanan. Tanan. כל מלאכה שנקמצו שלא רשמן כשרוס אלא שלא עלו לבעל משום חובה חוץ ממנחס חויתם מנחס כנויס ומיזן is נהנה מחוץ ממנחס ואומר. The Gemara asks, we learned in the Mishnah that all the meal offerings from which a handful is removed not for their sake are fit for sacrifice, but they did not satisfy the obligation of the owner except for the meal offering of a sinner and the meal offering of jealousy. And if it is so that an Omer meal offering from which a handful was removed not for its own sake is disqualified, then let the Mishnah also teach except for the Omer meal offering. Kikatani ba'yachi ba'zi b'logadani kitani ba'biglal atzma ba'biglal zevach logadani. The Gemara responds, when the Mishnah teaches this halachi, it teaches it only with regard to meal offerings that come on behalf of an individual. The Mishnah does not teach the halacha with regard to those whose meal offerings that come on behalf of the community. Additionally, when the Mishnah teaches this halacha, it is only with regard to a meal offering that comes on account of itself, meaning as an independent offering. The Mishnah does not teach the halacha with regard to a meal offering that comes on account of, for example, together with, that comes on account of, meaning together with a slaughtered offering, for example, the Omer meal offering, which is brought along with 2 sheep. The Gemara adds, furthermore, When the Mishnah teaches this halacha, it is only with regard to those whose meal offerings whose time is not set, meaning they may be sacrificed on any date. The Mishnah does not teach the halacha with regard to this Omer meal offering, whose time for offering is set on the 16th of Nisan. Amamau. וכן אתה אומר, והשם נזיר והשם צורך ששחטן שלא ישמע פסולים. הואילו בואו להכשיר ולא יכשירו. The Gemara analyzes the statement of Rav. The master said, and so you say with regard to the guilt offering of a Nazarite who became ritually impure, and so you say with regard to the guilt offering of a leper, that if one slaughtered these offerings not for their sake, they are disqualified. They are disqualified since their proper sacrifice came to render the Nazarite and leper fit, and they did not render them fit. Tanan. כל הזבחים שלכם שלא לשבון כשרים, אלא שלא עלו לבעל לשם חובה, חוץ מפסח וחטס. ואם ייסע לסינמי, חוץ מהשם נוזיו, והשם צורך לבוא להכשיר ולהכשיר. The Gemara asks, we learned the Mishnah in Zvachim 2a, back in September 16th, we did Zvachim 2a, which was a Tuesday. All slaughtered offerings that one slaughtered. Wow. We're almost close to January 16th. We're very close to it. All slaughtered offerings that one slaughtered not for their own sake are fit, but they did not satisfy the obligation of their own. This is the halacha with regard to all offerings except for the Paschal offering, and it's an offering which are disqualified when they slaughter. They are slaughtered not for their own sake. And if it is so, that the halacha is in accordance with the statement of Rav, let the Mishnah also teach, except the guilt offering of a Nazarite and the guilt offering of a leper, since they came to render one fit, and they did not render one fit. Kevandika Asham Zelos, Yashaminos, Dilapali lo Psikale. The Gemara answers, since there are other guilt offerings, meaning the guilt offering for robbery, which one brings after for taking a false oath, denying an accusation of robbery, and the guilt offering brought for misuse of consecrated property that come for atonement, which do not render one fit and are fit for sacrifice. If they were slaughtered not for their sake, the time of the Mishnah could not state the halacha with regard to guilt offerings in an absolute manner, and therefore he refrains from mentioning guilt offerings at all. Ma'ishna, Hashem Nazio, Yashem Mitzvah, Tibau L'Hachshiv V'Lo Yashiu, Ani Noim Ba'ol L'Chapor V'Lo Givu. The Gemara asks, what is different about the guilt offering of a Nazarite and the gift offering of a leper? Why are they disqualified when slaughtered not for their sake? Since they came to render fit and they did not render fit. These, meaning the guilt offerings for robbery and for misuse of consecrated property, should likewise be disqualified when slaughtered not for their own sake, since they came for atonement and they did not atone. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah Matzinu Shechir Gazu Ben Mechaprim Memachidem Mechaprim Yisbehu Tiasu Yachnis Mechaprim Lesbehu Tiasu Leachar Misad Tzanan Ha'isha Shevi Achadas Umeisa Yavi Yoshin Alaso Alaso Meisa Lavi Yoshin Chatas. Rabbi Jeremiah said, Yirmiyah said in response, we find that the Torah differentiates between those guilt offerings and that atone and those that render fit, that the halacha is more stringent with regard to those that render fit. Yirmiyah elaborates, with regard to those guilt offerings that atone, there are among them offerings that come after death, meaning they are sacrificed after the death of their owners, whereas with regard to those who render fit, there are none among them that come after death, as we learned in the Mishnah, Kinem 2:5. With regard to a woman after childbirth who brought her sin offering for her ritual purification and died, the heirs shall bring her burnt offering, which comes to atone. If she set aside her burnt offering and died, her heirs shall not bring her sin offering, as it comes to render her fit to partake of offerings. Ma'askim lo Rabbi Yehuda b'nei Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi. Machshirin nami miles behuda asu achar mizav ve'atanan ma'avishmaz l'ziraso non eri v'lo mo'alim b'nei shelo v'lo gulam shalavim. Rabbi Yehuda, son of Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, objects to this with regard to offerings that render fit as well. Are there not among them offerings that come after death? But didn't we learn in the Mishnah in Me'ilah 11a, in the case of one who separates funds for the offerings of his Naziraitship, in other words, his sin offering, burnt offering, and peace offering, a person may not derive benefit from them ab initio, but if one benefited from them after the fact, he is not liable for misuse of consecrated property. In other words, he is not required to bring a guilt offering and is not obligated to repay the principal and an additional fee. This is because the coins are all fit for bringing peace offerings, and there is no misuse of consecrated property with regard to funds fit for a peace offering. יפלו לנדדה מפורשים דמיוחדוס יוליך לים המלח לא נהנה ולא מועלין תמי הולה יביא בהן עולה ומעל בהן. The Mishnah continues, if the Nazarite died and he had undesignated funds that he set aside to pay for his Nazarite offerings without specifying how much money should be allocated toward each offering, they will be allocated for communal gift offerings. If he left behind allocated funds, then with regard to the money for a sin offering, one must take it and cast it into the Dead Sea. One may not benefit from it ab initio, but if one benefited from it after the fact, he's not liable for misuse of consecrated property. With regard to the money for burnt offering, one brings it with it at burnt offering, and one is liable for misusing them. Demei shlamim yavi behem shlamim v'nechal leyom echad v'te'unin lechem v'ha'oila shlamim dinaz v'chshir ninu v'kasu lachar misa. The Mishnah concludes with the money for a peace offering. One brings a peace offering with it, and these offerings are eaten for one day, like the peace offering brought by Nazarite, and do not require the loaves the loaves that are normally brought with the peace offering of a Nazarite. Rabbi Yehuda explains his question, but the burnt offering and peace offering of a Nazarite are offerings that render a Nazarite fit to drink wine, and yet they come after death. Amar Rav Papa, Hachi Kama Rav Yirmiyah, Lo Matzinu Hechsher Kavua Deva Leachar Misa. Rav Papa said in response that this is what Rabbi Yirmiyah is actually saying. We do not find an instance of a fixed manner of rendering fit that comes after death. In other words, there is no instance where the only offering that will render one fit to act in a manner previously prohibited to him may be sacrificed after death. And the offerings of a Nazarite are examples of a means of rendering fit that is not fixed. Okay, to be continued.